طيب. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So in the previous class we completed the section on purification, and as we mentioned that purification or tahara is obligatory upon the person in order for them to perform salah primarily, and also for other things as well. But the Prophet ﷺ, he said that the miftahul Jannah, as-salah miftahul Jannah. The salah is the key to Jannah, and purification therefore is of course the key to salah. And so now we're going to the section on salah, or at least that which is necessary for the believer to know in terms of the practice of salah, prayer. He says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, شروط صحة الصلاة. Okay, shurut is a plural for the word shart, and a shart is of course a condition. Okay, and it's that which is if it exists, then or at least that which has its condition met, the condition must be there. But if the condition is there, doesn't necessarily mean that which a condition is built upon would be met. And so just because the conditions of prayer are in existence does not mean that the person actually fulfills the prayer. Okay? The fulfillment of the prayer then is going to be the pillars of the prayer, the arkan of the salah. Once a person actually does the arkan of the prayer, that then will indicate that the prayer has been completed. But for the prayer itself to be valid, one must meet, certain conditions must be met as well. Okay, so here we're going to make a distinction between the conditions of the validity of prayer and the conditions of the obligation of prayer. And so, of course, if you are a Muslim and you are pubescent and you have your faculties in place, you're sane, so of course then you have to perform salah, and if there's no particular impediment or preventative such as the hayd of women, etc. But in terms of the validity of prayer, that is the minimum standard that must exist in order for your prayer then to be considered valid. Okay, in terms of the beginning of the prayer. So in other words, you cannot truly begin the prayer unless you've met these conditions. And then once you've met these conditions, now you can fulfill the arkan, the pillars of prayer. Okay, so these are the shurut, the conditions for the validity of prayer. The next chapter will be on the next section will be on the that which is obligatory within the prayer. In other words, the pillars of the prayer or the obligatory acts of the prayer. So he says, وَيُشْتَرَطُ لِصِحَّةِ الصَّلَاةِ, and it is conditioned for the validity of prayer. Number one, he says, مَعْرِفَةُ دُخُولِ الْوَقْتِ بِيَقِينٍ أو اجتهاد أو غلبة ظن فإن صلى مع الشك لم تصح صلاته. So the first of these conditions is knowing that the time of prayer has ended. Okay, so one must know that the time of prayer has entered. And that is either biyaqeen, either by certainty. One is certain that the time has entered. And that means that one has a witnessing of the time, the entrance of the time. So a direct witnessing, meaning that you should know when the times enter. And each of the prayers, Salat al-Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, and Isha, the entrance time has been laid out within the various schools of thought based on the Quran and the Sunnah. So let's start with Fajr. When does Fajr start? So in the night, there is a light that appears, which covers, which how do I say, illuminates vertically. Okay, and this is about half an hour or so before Fajr. This light is called the Fajr, or the spring of light, Al-Kadhib, the false Fajr. And so this is a particular light that appears in the sky, which is not actually Fajr. So just because there's a light in the sky in the middle of the night does not indicate that that is actually Fajr. How do we discern between that light and the actual Fajr light, which comes later? The light of Fajr al-Kadhib, the false Fajr, only goes up vertically. And then immediately it gets removed. So there's again darkness for a while. Whereas al-Fajr al-Sadiq, the true Fajr, it appears and then it spreads across the horizon. Okay? Why is that? What is the nature of al-Fajr al-Kadhib, the false Fajr? That is something that we should look at from a different perspective. But the true Fajr is, of course, now the sun's rays, which is beginning to cover the entirety of the earth. Okay, and so you won't only see one light that's being vertical up into the sky, but you're now going to see a horizontal light, very light, a very soft light entering over across the horizon. Okay, and again, this is not the sunrise. This is different to the sunrise, but it is the initial lights that emanate, that reach us for the sunrise. Okay, and that is, of course, an hour and 20 minutes or hour and a half, basically, before the actual sunrise. And then so knowing the time of Fajr, knowing that Fajr starts at that particular time until sunrise, okay, and that's the time of Fajr. And then the time of Dhuhr, and so the time of Dhuhr is between the zenith, when the sun has reached the top of the middle of the sky, just after it's reached by like a minute, by like a few seconds even, that Dhuhr then starts. In other words, if you were to take a stick and put it in the sand, there would be no shadow. But the moment there appears to be even a millimeter of a shadow, that's the start of the waqt, of the time of Dhuhr. Okay? And so this is part of yaqeen. It's part of certainty. Why? Because the Sharia has laid out to us a particular method in order to determine the time of the prayer. And so because the Sharia has given it to us, it is certainty. As for the other methods that we're going to be talking about now, these are not certain methods, but there are sufficient methods. Okay, and because they've not been, they're not the primary method that which the Sharia has given us, Sunnah. Okay, then the time of Dhuhr ends at the time of Asr. Okay, all right, and that is when the shadow cast from the stick, from the sun onto the stick, is more than itself, is bigger than itself. Okay, once it's reached a length bigger than itself, that is when the time of Asr has started. That is according to the Shafi'iyya. You know, many of the Hanafis, they have a different method. The Hanafis, their Asr is later. Okay, and also what is important to note within our school of thought is that we are obligated to pray in the beginning of the time, and if you don't pray in the beginning of the time, then you should make an intention that you will be praying the next part of the time, which is still within the time period of the salah. In other words, if you are after the zenith, and so dhuhr comes in, the time of dhuhr comes in, it is obligatory for you to pray at that time. But it is not obligatory in the sense that if you don't pray, you are punishable. But rather, it is incumbent for you to heed the obligation or the call of the salah. So either you do so by action, or you do so by intending to pray within the time of prayer, which is about, from the time of dhuhr till asr. But if you do not make the intention to pray, even if you don't pray at that very beginning of the time of dhuhr, then you are sinful. Okay? So making the intention to pray and then praying within the time is necessary. But if you don't make the intention to pray within the time, as soon as you know that the time is ended, you are accountable for that. So what does that mean? That means that if you've made the intention and you intended to pray, right, but you've missed the prayer because you were busy or because you fell asleep, even though you thought you'd wake up before the end of the time, you are not accountable for that because you did make the intention to pray and you didn't miss the prayer intentionally. But if you were busy with something and your mind went away and you didn't realize that the time is gone, or you've fallen asleep even though you wanted to wake up before the end of the time, but you didn't, you're not accountable for that. Whereas if you don't make the intention, right, or you know that if you go to sleep now, you're not going to wake up before the end of the prayer time, then you are accountable for that. Okay? And that is why, okay, so that's sufficient for this particular. Okay. So then the time of Maghrib is, of course, after the sun has set. Okay, completely. But the sun setting completely means that the disk of the sun is gone. Okay. And so this will obviously come into discussion for fasting as well. When you break your fast in the time of Maghrib, if you're in a land and then Maghrib is gone and then you break your fast and then you go into an aeroplane and you get into the sky, you still see the sun. Does that mean that you broke your fast before the time of sunset? No. Because this is all related to the actual perspective of the person, the mukallaf, the accountable person. And so that is why after Fajr, because you remember when the sun is rising, you're not allowed to perform any extra prayers, right? And that is because of it's being haram to pray a particular prayer at that particular time. But they say that when then do you pray the sunnah of duha? Sunnah of duha, which is a sunnah prayer, extra prayer, that you pray after the sun has risen. And they say that by qadr rumh, arba' rumh, the span of a bow and arrow or an arrow of 16 degrees, basically, 4 of them, which is 16 degrees. So the 16 degrees is not from our perspective, from the perspective of the actual sun. The 16 degrees is from our perspective, that the sun has risen from our perspective 16 degrees, and so which takes about 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes. Now you can pray the duha. Now it's accepted again for you to pray extra prayers. Whereas in reality, the sun, how do I say, the earth has moved a lot more. So perhaps the sun is also moved in relation to the sun, to the earth, much more than 16 degrees in reality, or much more than particular measurement that we only know. So yeah, this just shows us that there are certain acts of worship that we are accountable based on our perception of things. And then there are other things within Islam and in worship and in other acts of parts of the law, which is not about the perspective of the person, but rather about the actual thing inherently, the nafsul amr, things as they are in the inherent self. And this is, of course, something which goes back to the nature of that thing. Okay? And so we'll discuss that more as we go across different chapters in terms of what relates to the individual's perception of things and the thing in and of itself. All right. So Maghrib ends according to the Mu'tamad, according to the relied upon position of the Shafi'i school, when the Shafaq al-Ahmar, when the redness of the sky is completely gone. So then that is when Isha enters. Okay, so that redness, which lasts for like an hour and 10 minutes, an hour and 20 minutes as well. And then Isha has ended. Now, for anyone who reads up about the life of the Imam al-Shafi'i, you might come across the discussion of how he was first in Iraq and he had an old madhab, an old school thought. And then he came to Egypt and he changed most of his positions. And then they'll say, for example, that the Shafi'i madhab today, in its form as we have it today, school of thought that we follow, it still follows some of the old madhab's positions. Some say like 18 of them. Okay, and they would claim that one of these positions is this particular issue that we're talking about now, which is the time of Maghrib. Because in the new madhab, in the new position of Imam Shafi'i himself, when he came to Egypt, he said that the Salat al-Maghrib ends, it's about a half an hour. In other words, it takes enough time for you to do the wudu if you need to finish it, if you're eating, to do ghusl perhaps, to wash your clothing, to get your clothing ready for you to wear and to perform the raka'at of Maghrib, which takes about a half an hour. Now that, just because it's his position within Egypt, the new madhab, and the old position was that it's until Isha, does not mean that we are taking the old position. Because the old madhab of Imam Shafi'i, he basically said that he is absolved himself from that, because that was in a particular location. And actually a lot of the proofs that he had used then has been abrogated by a new perspective on particular proofs from the Quran and Sunnah. So what we are saying, that when we do follow the position that Maghrib ends at Isha, Maghrib does not end like at half an hour after the beginning of Maghrib, is that yes, there is a position like that from the old madhab, but there's also a position like that within the new madhab. That Imam Shafi'i himself, he held that particular position within Egypt, but there was also a riwayah from him from the new madhab that either says it explicitly that it ends at Isha, or his principles lead to that particular conclusion. Okay, because that causes that casts doubt people, like, okay, are we following two different madhahib within the madhab of Imam Shafi'i based on two different principles? No, the principles are one, and they are solid and they are firm. They're based on a philosophy, and that is the new madhab of Imam Shafi'i that he spoke about in Egypt, that is based on his book Al-Right? And other of the books that his students wrote, and not based on the principles which he followed in Iraq. Okay, so this is an important point just for anyone who's reading about Imam al-Shafi'i. So, and then of course the waqt of Isha ends at Fajr. Okay, but every particular time of the prayer, each prayer is divided into different times as it relates to the virtue of prayer. If you pray in the beginning of the prayer, you get rewarded an extra reward for it. It's called waqtul fadila, the virtuous time. Okay? And that's about 15 minutes. The first 15 minutes of the prayer, 15 to 20 minutes, if you pray within that time, then you get not only the reward of performing the obligatory prayer, but you also get the reward for performing the prayer in the beginning of the time. Okay? And then you have waqtul al-ikhtiyar or waqtul al-jawaz. It's different times that we'll go into in later books. At the end, you get to what's called waqtul hurma. Waqtul hurma. So it becomes, as each the time of each prayer develops. It's like it's permissible now. Now it's become permissible, but it's disliked. Then the last period of the prayer, which is like less than a minute left until the next prayer. What is the ruling, the hukum of praying in that time? So let's say you wake up, right, and it's a minute left until the next salah, and you haven't yet performed that particular salah. It says that the time there to pray in is haram. It's prohibited, but not prohibited that you should pray. You must pray. It's still obligatory upon you to pray. But that the time now has lapsed to such a little time left that you are now blameworthy for praying so late. Okay? And that you don't get a reward for praying, an extra reward for praying on time. Yes, you have prayed within the time of the salah, especially if you get the first raka'ah, the first unit of the cycle of the prayer, within the time. And even if you get the rest of the salah outside of the time, the salah still counts within the time. But now that you've performed it so late that you are now blameworthy for that. Okay? So when people say, oh, it's haram to pray at the end of the time, even though it's still within the time, it's haram. Don't think, oh, no, you're not allowed to pray. No, you must pray. It's obligatory. You're rewarded for the prayer. But you are blameworthy from the perspective of delaying the prayer to such a late time. Okay, does that make sense? Does that make sense, right? Okay. So this is to do with the time of the prayer, biyaqeen, okay, with certainty. Okay. Then he says, aw ijtihad, or through effort, or through making a deduction. And this is basically deduction through particular habits of timekeeping. So if in the olden days, like they had these roosters who would always make a sound at Fajr, and when they notice that this is actually the time of Fajr, and so to keep that as your practice and to pray whenever the rooster makes the noise, then that is also a method in which you know the time of a particular prayer. As opposed to many of the roosters in our day and age, which that's not the case. Okay? Why? Because we feed them food that's not good for them. Okay. Oh, غلبة الظن. And غلبة الظن here, of course, is relating to certain indicators, okay, such as the clock. Some people say that the clock is ijtihad. Some people say that the time is غلبة الظن. But at the end, they all mean the same thing. Okay? It's not yaqeen. It's not certainty. Rather, you are now using the efforts or the deduction of something else or someone else. Okay. And of course, the adhan of the mu'adhin from the masjid or from wherever you're listening to, that is not, even though it seems like it's yaqeen, no, it is also ijtihad. It's not the primary way of knowing the time. It is a secondary way, but that it's sufficient and it's acceptable. And then he says, فَإِنْ صَلَّى مَعَ الشَّكِّ, if you pray the prayer and you are doubtful of the time, right, then your salah is not valid. What does that mean? If I start to pray my salah and I'm doubtful, has salah entered, what's the next prayer, dhuhr? Salatul dhuhr, has it entered or not? I'm doubtful, but I pray because I'm in a rush, whatever, busy. And then after I'm done praying, it turns out that I was in fact praying within the time. Okay, is my salah valid or not? It's not valid. It's not valid. Why? Because all of this is part of the intention. In other words, that when you make the intention for the salah in the beginning of the salah, part of the intention, part of the conditions of the intention is that one must be certain of that which you are doing. And so if you're certain of that which you're doing, you need to know that you're doing it within its time. And so your salah would not be valid, even if it does occur in its time, but because you didn't have knowledge of that particular time. Okay? So this is very important for us to distinguish between what the condition really is. It is that you must know the time, entrance of time, not that the time is simply ended. Okay? Okay, and then he says, وَيُشْتَرَطُ, number 2, the second condition, مَعْرِفَةُ الْقِبْلَةِ. Okay, مَعْرِفَةُ الْقِبْلَةِ. And this is, of course, knowledge of the Qibla. What is the Qibla? The Qibla is it, so where you guys, what is the All Blacks rugby stadium called?
Eden Park?
Is it Eden Park? Is that the Qibla? No, it's not. Right? It's Mecca, right? It's the Kaaba, rather. It's the Kaaba. So, yeah, it's not simply knowing the Qibla, but what he means by it is istiqbal al-Qibla, by facing the Qibla. Okay? And there's no room really to face the Qibla. In the Shafi'i madhab in our school, the most lenient position is that you're allowed to face the Qibla 45 degrees either way. So if you're to the right, more than 45 degrees, you're away from the Qibla. If you're to the left, away from the Qibla by 45 degrees, you're outside of the Qibla. That is the most lenient view. But the proper view is you must be directly straight towards the Qibla. Okay, and it's a big difference. Like 45 degrees is like that. It's a lot, right? So one needs to be head on towards the Qibla. Okay, and so I don't know what the Qibla is in New Zealand, but the curve of the earth sometimes also affects the Qibla. So I know that, like in America, they pray. You'd think that they would pray south east, right? Or just east with a little bit south. You'd think that that's how they pray, because America is up top and then Mecca is like east but a little bit down. But in actual fact, some of the people in America, they pray east north, as if they're praying upwards to the right, because of the curvature of the earth. Okay, so one must also know, and you should probably do some research about that if you don't know already exactly the direction to Mecca. How was the Qibla established within New Zealand? Okay, so knowing the Qibla, but also facing the Qibla. Okay, and if you've prayed outside of the Qibla in a way that it is more than 45 degrees away from the Qibla, which is the stipulate, most lenient stipulation within the Shafi'i school, and you've now discovered that you've actually prayed outside of that, you can then follow Abu Hanifa after the fact. So the Hanafi school allows 180 degrees, as long as you're within 180 degrees radius of the Qibla. Okay, and so that means that, and it's allowed that to do tasheeh, to rectify your prayer after the fact. In other words, you're now consciously saying, okay, I will put that prayer as according to a different school, because it's valid according to that school. It wouldn't be valid according to my school. And if you want to be very careful, then you would repeat the prayer, but it's not necessary to do so. If you have another school which is valid upon. Because all of these things are human understandings of the Sharia. You're not living with Mecca and Medina. And here again, how do you know the Qibla? Also, biyaqeen is one of the methods. What do you mean biyaqeen? The Kaaba is in front of you. If you're in the Haram, in the Mataf, in the Haram of Mecca, and the Kaaba is in front of you. And in fact, there were people, I know people who, they open up the Qibla app and it doesn't show towards the Kaaba. So no, trust your own vision of the Kaaba rather than the app. But then, of course, there is, of course, ijtihad by the son, or following someone who is known to know these things. And then, of course, you have also Ghalabat al-Dhan, as he mentioned, which is like a sign such as an ihram. So in the old masajid, like in fact in Egypt, the very first mosque in Egypt built, which is Masjid Amr ibn al-As, built by the Sahabi Amr ibn al-As, they did recently they did a measurement of the Qibla, that mosque is directly towards the Kaaba. Whereas many of the other masajid is not like that. Okay, later on. So even though they were so close to the time of the Prophet, 21 Hijri, the mosque was built, right? 21 year or 10 years after the passing of the Prophet. And they had no other measurements, but they knew exactly the Qibla through the particular ijtihad that they had done. And so in any time of the prayer, if you move away from the Qibla, your salah becomes invalid. And so that's why when you end the prayer, when you do the tashahhud, when you say at-tahiyatu al-mubarakatuh, and you say assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi, right? When you do the taslim, be careful not to turn your whole body when you do the taslim. It's only your head that's supposed to turn, not your whole chest. Okay? Because that would invalidate your prayer. You understand that knowledge, what we are talking about here is some of it is simply just stating the obvious, but it's so that we can can think of things in this way. You might already know this, but I'm just reminding us and stating the obvious at certain times, because a lot of people fall into these mistakes. And so when are you allowed to follow someone else when it comes to the Qibla? You're only allowed to follow someone else's Qibla when you yourself are not able to make ijtihad from that particular direction. So if you yourself can't do it, so if you're in a group and one person has said, okay, that's the Qibla, and you haven't even checked, you haven't even made sure, you're not allowed to do that. Because if you have the ability to measure using a map, or like giving Google Maps and like try to measure, or using the sun, if you have that ability to know direction, what is east, what is west, you know which direction you should be following, then you're not allowed to simply follow. You should also check yourself. And many a times when you do check, you'll find that that person has made a mistake. And so therefore to do so, mitigates the, how to say, lessens the risk involved in making a mistake. Yeah. Okay, then number 3 is, sorry, someone has asked the question, I didn't see the chat. How does it work for Isha? I've been told to delay that. That is not with regards to the beginning of the prayer. The beginning of Isha, the Waqtul Fadila is also the first 15 minutes. And the sunnah of delaying the Isha is only if there's a reason. So if you are in a gathering, a lesson, even dhikr, anything that has even the smallest reason that is of something which is good, not something which is bad or something permissible merely. But if there's a good act that you are doing already and the time of Isha is entering now, you're allowed to delay, and you'll still get the reward of the fadila because you're following the sunnah, because the Prophet used to do that. Okay. Whereas if there's nothing you're doing and you're just sitting and now Isha has entered and you're not doing anything, no, the waqt al-fadila, the best time is that moment. And of course, to pray within the first half of the night is that which is also virtuous. Okay, it's less virtuous than the first half an hour, first 15 minutes, first 20 minutes, whatever, that first period. So when I said the first period, it's really within the first half an hour. Why? Because they say that the first 15 minutes is for you to get ready to pray. So to eat, finish, to wash yourself, to make wudu, to get your clothes ready. That first 15 minutes is not the only time. So it's within the first half an hour, really, because you need some time to get ready. But after the half of the night for Isha, then it becomes permissible to pray. Okay? In other words, you get reward for the prayer, but not the extra reward. And the time of the night starts with Maghrib, not with Isha. Okay? So if Maghrib is at 8 p.m. and Fajr is at 4 a.m., then the middle of the night is 12, even though Isha might be at 9:30. So in terms of sleep, it's important for one to get the way that they would sleep immediately after Isha, usually, and then would be able to wake up middle of the night, or at least the last third of the night. Okay, the number 3 is وَيَجِبُ سَتْرُ الْعَوْرَةِ. Of course, now this is not this is a condition of the prayer because it's an obligatory thing that one must perform before the prayer. To cover the awrah, بِسَاتِرٍ طَاهِرٍ مُبَاحٍ, with a permissible, pure or clean covering. Okay. The awrah, of course, of a man is the minimum awrah is between the navel and the knees, not covering them, but covering a part of them, even a little bit of the navel or a little bit of the knees. But if the entirety of the navel is showing, it's fine, but usually that causes the rest of the awrah then also to become uncovered. Okay. And for women, it's the entirety of her body except for the face and the hands, according to the majority position. Okay, so woman must cover her feet as well in salah, according to the main position within our madhab. And it becomes problematic if you follow a more lenient position about the feet, because then you might have to change school of thought in your prayer. That becomes, which is the Hanafi school. But generally, if you were to have prayed according to the Shafi position and your feet has been open, it's valid and accepted because there is a position within our madhab that allows it, but it's not the strongest position. Okay, so there's no problem with that. Okay, and the position that says that the awrah of a woman includes her face, that is not within the prayer, because in the prayer your forehead must touch the floor, the ground. And so for those who say that entirety of the woman's body is her awrah, they don't mean that within the prayer, they mean that outside of the prayer. Okay. And that is, of course, a position with these large differences of opinion on that. There is agreement, however, that the entirety of a woman's body is a awrah when there's fitan, when there are particular societal trials, women are being attacked, harassed, etc. like that. So in those occasions, but in the West, if you're being attacked for wearing a hijab, right, then the opposite can sometimes become true. So if a woman takes off her hijab because she's living in the West and she's open to harassment or attack, and she takes off her hijab, who are you to ever think of that as something bad? And many of the fuqaha have allowed that. Okay, so in terms of our madhab, if the principle is sound, then her taking off her hijab in a time of trouble, is she doing something haram, or is she doing something that is makruh? Is she doing something disliked? Nonetheless, if you want to be careful and not to fall into any problems within the Sharia potentially, then you continue wearing your hijab, unless you're given a fatwa by someone reliable who understands the reality that you're living in, and a scholar. But within our madhab, it's of course not allowed to take off your hijab for no reason. Can I repeat that, please? Oh yeah, of course I can repeat that. You want to hear the fatwa on hijab? It's not a fatwa, but this is a position that a lot of the scholars have taken in the past about the point of hijab. Why does a woman wear hijab? Woman wears hijab so that she may not be harmed. That was the original, and that she may be known as a Muslim. Because the women in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, while the Muslims were there, if they were not wearing hijab, they would normally be attacked because they did not have any protection from a religious standpoint. And so the hijab served as a reminder to the men that these are honored women and they are Muslim and they should be protected. And so if in a particular case, and this is not this is simply an exception that sometimes occurs and that should not be practiced on one's own unless one goes back to a scholar who has understanding of your reality that you're living in. But if you're attacked for wearing hijab, and as a result of that, you took your hijab off, you would not be considered to be blameworthy as much as someone who would take off the hijab without a reason. Okay? Because there is a precedent for that. Okay, I hope it's clear. I'm not saying that women are not allowed, don't have to wear hijab in the West. Okay. Yeah, but this is something that our scholars have always mentioned, and we are in a particular setting here, which we understand that this is knowledge, and we're not applying things simply without any reason. And it's not also a fatwa. Exactly. You're not allowed to take it off permanently in the West like that, but rather, and nor taking it off in a moment of being harassed. Not that either. But I'm talking about someone who has done so already, and how we view that person. Because certain rulings that we have are, of course, precursive rulings, and some of them are after the fact. So if a woman out of wedlock has a baby, and then she decides to get married, that marriage of hers is something positive, and it's not because she became pregnant. So these are discussions that are discussed by the ulama as well. Okay, but let's not get sidetracked from the original point, that the awrah of a woman is the entire body, excluding the hands and the face. Okay. Tahir, that of course there should be no najis on the body. Okay, so the body, so not the body, rather the piece of a garment that you're covering yourself with, is going to be tahir. Is something that is pure and rather not dirtied. Are we still accountable and sinful if, for example, the time of dhuhr comes and our work gets busy, where we don't have the opportunity to take a break, and so we pray dhuhr and asr together? Okay, so if you do so intentionally because you know that the time has come in, and you don't pray intentionally, of course you are blameworthy and accountable. But if you forgot the time unintentionally and then you prayed later, then you're not accountable for that. But then the prayer is still qada, it's still a make-up prayer, because you've still missed the prayer. So you don't get extra reward for praying the prayer. It's simply to remove the obligation. And so nowadays, if we have phones, you can make an alarm clock to know when the time of prayer is. There's no excuse. And if it's out of fear because you're at work, then there's a bigger problem. Okay, so why are you working at this place? Can't you ask for 3 minutes to pray, etc.? So yes, we are still accountable if this is done intentionally. Okay. And then when we say by a covering, satir, something which is a satir, a covering that covers the awrah, what if you're performing surgery? No, then absolutely you're allowed to do taqdeem or ta'khir. There are certain times where you can delay or bring forward the prayer. And if that means that you have to, before the fact, pray the prayers early or later or just at the end of the time, then you're allowed to do so with reason. If a surgery covers the entirety of the time, and it has to be at that time, entirety of the time of the prayer, one is allowed to pray in other ways, such as with the eyes, احتراما للوقت, out of respect for the time, and then to fulfill the prayer afterwards. Okay. But this is a particular bahth which we can deal with separately. It's a good question, but to probably have a many different scenarios related to it. But simply because you're performing surgery that covers up the time doesn't necessarily mean that you can't pray, okay? Because the prayer is still the obligation. Or do we have just like doctors in here or something?
There's a few, yeah. Alhamdulillah, there's a couple of medical students. I was actually thinking if it might be something we might, through this institute, look into at some point, just doing like even a one-off session, just looking at some of the fiqh to do with certain medical things, because there's a few, alhamdulillah.
Yes, indeed, inshallah. All right. So then he says, satir, right? So a covering. What is this covering exactly? This covering, what we mean by the covering, something which covers the color of the skin. So as long as the color of the skin is covered, it is considered a satir, which means that if you cover yourself with a cloth that's see-through, it's not considered a satir. You're not covering your body. You're not covering your awrah. If it's see-through and you can still see the general color of the skin. But if you cover the body with a cloth that covers even if it's thin, but it covers the body in a way that you cannot see the color of the skin, then your prayer is valid. And the same thing goes for, just iftiradan, making a hypothetical here. If one were to be covered with henna, henna, the orange or brown, and that covers the color of your body, and you're not wearing clothing, that would be allowed. Why? Because, of course, you're not going to do it in public. You're doing that in private. But it would be allowed technically. Why? Because you have covered the skin. And so when someone looks at you, perhaps they would not at first glance know that you're not wearing anything. Okay? But I'm not talking about the thin henna. It has to be thick henna. That is basically like a cover. Basically like plaster. Like one of these cloths that you wear. And the same thing goes for if you're in murky water and no one can see underneath the water, and you pray within the pool, or you're praying within the ocean. If you were to do so, hypothetically, that would be allowed as well. Okay. What about the people that cover their skin with body paint? No. Body paint would not count, because henna is made from a particular material, and the way that it used to be used was very thick and rough, and would cover the entire body as if it was a covering that's not like paint. Paint is something different. So there has to be a covering that covers and protects the body from being naked. You're not allowed to be naked. So the henna is not that you're fully naked, but rather that you're covered in a certain way that is in, yeah. darkness covering all comes from. Is this where the allegedly Zahiri?
So I've been told that in the Dhahiri madhab, if someone was to pray completely naked but in a completely dark room, they would consider Salat
Yeah, I heard that from a different madhab, but perhaps it's the Zahiri. Yeah, if you're alone and that is the case, yeah, but that's definitely not. It goes against our madhab. So again, I'm really just discussing the very bare minimum. Okay, no pun intended. And then mubah. Okay, so if you were to pray in clothing that you've stolen, the prayer would still be valid, but you have a sin. You're sinful from the perspective of praying with a stolen garment. Okay. Number 4, رفع النجاسة من الثوب والبدن والمكان. To remove impurities from the thawb, your clothing, and the body, and the place in which you are praying. So to remove impurity from the thawb, that's what is mentioned when he said tahir, satiran tahir, right? So that's straightforward. Again, what that means also is that any attachment to the thawb is part of the thawb. So if you have have a shawl, right, like a shawl, call it shawl in English, and it's attached to your body in a way that it's difficult to take off, and a bird just like comes and relieves itself on you. That's part of your body now, so your salah becomes invalid. But if you have a shawl that's on your shoulder only, and the moment you see the dirt comes off and you throw it off you without carrying it as if you're holding it and then throwing it, then you can continue salah. But the moment you carry something, and that carrying is as if it's part of your body, connected to you. And so that connection makes your body, or the thawb, is also then dirty. And the same thing if you have a dog, and you have a leash of a dog, right? And you're holding the leash and you're praying, and the dog is on the other side of the leash. It's your dog. You don't want the dog to go missing. The dog is najis. The dog is dirty. That means you're attached to dirt. Unless you have one of those leashes which are connected to the collar of the dog that's actually not connected to him. There's a way to do so, but I can't really show it now. Or if you're carrying your baby and your baby has relieved themselves within the nappy, right? You call it a nappy as well, right? Yeah. So that's also najis. And so therefore, that would invalidate your prayer, and your prayer would not be valid. Okay. And so that is why picking up a baby during prayer, you have to know that the baby is not dirty. You're allowed to pick up the baby, of course, and to save babies in danger, especially, you should definitely pick up your baby. And even if the baby is going to get hurt, you're allowed to move the baby, even though you're in prayer. But if the baby is, dirty, or you discover after the prayer that the baby is dirty, you have to repeat the prayer. The prayer was invalid. Okay. Because the salah is a time of connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, unlike any other, and it has a tremendous effect on your life. So much so that anyone who prays, who has been praying all their life, regularly, and just for one reason they overslept, or they got busy and so they didn't pray one prayer, they will see the effect immediately. That you're feeling in your heart that, oh, I just didn't pray this one prayer in time and I prayed it after it's as if like there's the light that's in your life just like removed for a moment. And that's a sign of acceptance, because Allah, when His servants, those whom He loves and those who are close to Him, the moment that they do something sinful, immediately He shows them that they've done something sinful. So there's an immediate effect, because He loves for them to come back to Him. Whereas those who are constantly in sin and they do not care about sin, they won't see that effect immediately. that effect will build up and build up until it becomes, until they basically say deluded that they're doing good. Yeah. All right. Makan, as for the place that you're praying, it's to do with the 7 parts of the body that touches the ground in the sajda, in the prostration. So if there is dirt in the, like where your stomach is, right, which doesn't touch the ground unless you have a big stomach, but generally it shouldn't be touching the ground, right, your stomach. But if there's dirt there, but it's not touching your body while you're in prostration, but it's in front of you, your prayer is valid, but it's disliked to do so. Okay, so it's really the 7 parts of the body that touches the ground, which is the forehead, the 2 hands, the 2 knees, and the 2 sets of toes, right? For your toes, 1 toe should at least be curved on each foot. So I see a lot of people when they go into sajda, they just put their feet flat, and they curve. Their feet are like not curved, yani. So even for 1 toe to be curved, you have to do so. So it must be like, you understand what I mean, right? So that's important. The only time where you wouldn't have to do all of these things for the sajda is if you're praying on the prayer, and those who say that you can pray on a prayer, within our madhab, just like a very minority of those who say that you can pray on an aeroplane. And you, because the minimum requirement in that circumstance, based on the weak position in the madhab, is that only your forehead should touch the ground or the seat in front of you to pray, right? And so that's when you're praying on an aeroplane, and you're not allowed to pray stand up or anything. At least if your forehead touches the seat in front of you, that is as if you're doing sajda. Okay, that's based on the most minimum requirement of the weakest position within our school. But you can still do that prayer, and you don't have to make it up. You don't have to repeat it, in other words. Okay, so hope that's understood. And also, for both men and women, your forehead should touch the ground, even a part of the forehead. So a lot of when I was younger, especially, I used to keep my hair like to the side, like Justin Bieber. And a lot of people do that, or they cover the entire head with the kufi. Your forehead is not touching the ground. Your salah is invalid. So at least if a portion of the forehead touches the ground, should be. Okay. And then the last one is, it is obligatory for those who are able to pray standing. Okay. In other words, it is from the conditions of validity of prayer that one must stand in the prayer, in the qiyam. When to Allah Akbar, you must be standing. Now, if you see an old person in the masjid sitting on the chair and they start their prayer sitting, okay, are they allowed to do so or not? No, they're not allowed to do so. And a lot of people, they make that mistake. You'll find them walking kilometers to the masjid, and the moment they get into the masjid, they sit down. But they should be standing during prayer. For the obligatory prayer, you must stand. Now, if they're not able to stand, they should at least start the prayer standing and then sit. Okay, until they're able to not stand anymore, then they can sit. But even then, you're not really supposed to sit immediately. You should first do inhina, as if you're going to ruku, because you can't hold it anymore. Then you can sit. Okay, and in the fard prayer, that's how it is. And if you can't sit, then you can lay to your side. And if you aren't able to lay to your side, you can lay on your back. And if you can't do the actions with your body while laying on your back, then you should do so with your eyes, and with your, as if you're leaning, making the movements with your eyes, etc., and with your feet. And if you can't do so, then with your heart. So if someone who is paralyzed in a bed and they can't do so, they still have to pray? Yes, but with their heart. And that was the case of the Muslims in South Africa, my forefathers, who were persecuted. They were not allowed to pray, otherwise they'd be killed. Like the early parts of our history, like more than 300 years ago, then they would pray with their eyes, with their heart. So this is all related to the obligatory 5 prayers in the day. Okay. As for the sunan prayers, you're allowed not to stand. You don't have to stand. But so if you sit, you're allowed to sit down. Okay, in the qiyam, in the beginning of the prayer. But that means that you will get half of the reward. That's what it is. If you don't stand and you sit, you get half of the reward for standing. For that particular act, obviously, not for the entire prayer. Okay. And if you can't sit, then you can lay on your side, right? But that's the most that it goes to. For sunnah, you don't get more than laying on your side. You can't lay on your back and do a sunnah. You can't do it with your eyes or with your heart. It's only the fard that has those extra stages. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So yeah, this is obviously very important as well. And so now we go to the furud of salah, the obligatory acts of salah. Okay. So we need to separate obviously between the conditions and the obligatory acts of salah. The furud of salah, okay, the conditions of validity of salah, as we mentioned, there are 5. The furud of salah, if you count each of the how do I say, the parts of the unit of prayer, within each of them you have to remain still as an extra pillar within the salah, then you go up to 17. Okay, but the number is not important. It's rather the tartib of acts, during the sequence of acts. So the first obligatory, of course, is the niyyah, the intention. Every action is judged by the intention. And the salah is, of course, a dua in its linguistic meaning. It's a dua for goodness. And so for you to make dua, you must have an intention. And this particular salah, of course, is a physical act, which is a form of worship that has particular actions with a particular intention. And that which is obligatory within the salah, some of it is physical and some of it is verbal. Some of it is actions and some of it is words. Okay. And the niyyah, of course, is the action, but it's an action of the heart, because one does not have to say the niyyah out loud, but rather one should think it. And when should you think it? When you are doing the takbiratul ihram, when you say Allahu Akbar, that is during the time you say the takbir, you must bring to mind the intention of the prayer. And so what is the intention of the prayer? As we mentioned, it is in the heart, so one doesn't have to say it out loud. If you do say it out loud before the takbiratul ihram, it is a sunnah. Before you say Allahu Akbar, right? Before that, if you say Nawaitu Fard al-Salat al-Dhuhr, Arba Rak'atin Sa'ul al-Qiblat lillahi ta'ala, whatever you want to say, Nawaitu Fard al-Salat al-Dhuhr, for example, just that. Or the minimum is to say Nawaitu Fard al-Salat al-Dhuhr, or Nawaitu Fard al-Dhuhr, for example, just those 3 things. Then that is the niyyah that you're saying out loud is a sunnah, but it's not actually the niyyah, because you still have to do that in your heart when you do the takbir. Say Allah. Okay. So the niyyah has 3 components when it comes to the fard salah. The first component is that you must do a qasd, intention of the action. In other words, nawaitu, I intend to do the action, nawaitu salah, fard al-salah. Or so you just say nawaitu, nawaitu, that's the intention to do something. Then the second one is to specify the particular prayer that you're doing. So if it's Fajr, you say Nawaitu al-Fajr, or Nawaitu al-Dhuhr, or Nawaitu al-Asr. And the third thing is to specify that it is a fard, that it's an obligation. So that's why I said Nawaitu fard al-Salat al-Dhuhr, or Nawaitu fard al-Dhuhr. I intend obligatory act of Dhuhr, or Maghrib, whatever you're going to do. Okay? So these are the three things. And this is for every fard prayer. If you don't do that, the intention in your mind, in your heart, in your mind, then it is not going to be valid according to the Shafi'i madhab. Okay, whereas the Hanafis, they don't have this exactly as the Shafi'i. But if you are doing a sunnah prayer, like an extra prayer, that's not the fard, and that particular sunnah prayer is a known prayer that you know, that like Salat al-Duha, the sunnah before Salat al-Dhuhr, before or after Salat al-Dhuhr, or Taraweeh, or Witr, or any of these extra prayers that we have. Here you don't have to say sunnah, fard. Here you just say Nawaitu Taraweeh, Nawaitu al-Duha. So you just do qasd, you do the intention of the action, and to specify which prayer you're doing. Okay? So in other words, this particular sunnah has a sabab. There's a reason why you're doing it, and its reason is known. Or it has a particular time that it's done in, or it's a connection to one of the fards. As for a sunnah, an extra prayer which does not have any time or place or specific reason or connected to a fard, this is called a sunnah, a nafil mutlaq, a nafil or sunnah mutlaqa, okay, which is just absolute sunnah. So you're just praying. And this, there's no limit to this. You can do whenever you want to do this, except for 3 times in a day, which we'll talk about now. But generally, this you just intend the action. You say Nawaitu Salah, Nawaitu Salah. If you just say Nawaitu Salah and you pray 2 units, 4 units, with each 2 units having a tahiyyah, then you'll be fine. When are the times that you're not allowed to pray a sunnah? Okay, you're always allowed to pray a fard unless you're going to be praying a fard out of its time. But you have to pray a fard in its time. But for the sunnah mutlaqa, right? You're not allowed to, or any sunnah for that matter, you're not allowed to pray it at sunrise, at the zenith, at zawal in the middle of the sky, the sun is in the middle of the sky, and at sunset. For those few moments, it's very short, lasts a very short time period, you're not allowed to do any sunnah pray. Okay? Whereas after Fajr Salah, like after you make the fard of Fajr Salah, up until sunrise, and after Asr Salah, after you make the fard of Asr, up until sunset, you're not allowed to make a sunnah that doesn't have a reason, but you are allowed to make a sunnah. Okay? So distinguish between sunrise, zenith, and sunset. That's when you're not allowed to make any type of sunnah. Whereas after you've made the fard of Fajr and after the Fajr of Asr, between that and sunrise and between that and sunset, you're not allowed to make a sunnah that has no reason. That is before it. A sunnah that has a reason before it. Yani that has caused it to be a sunnah. So what does that mean? If you've made Salat al-Asr, right? You've made fard. And then there's a class in the masjid. Okay? There's a class in the masjid. Now you're going to the masjid and you've entered the masjid. You've already performed Asr, hey? At home or at another masjid. Now you've entered this masjid. There's a sunnah called Tahiyyatul Masjid, greeting the mosque. Right? Are you allowed to perform that or not? No, you're not allowed to perform that if it's after the fard of Asr. No, you are allowed to. You are allowed to. Why? Because there's a reason for you to pray that has preceded the salah. Whereas, for example, if you like a particular other salah, which might have a reason that comes later, like istikhara. If you're asking Allah to give you something in the future, like istikhara or guidance, then you're not allowed to do that at these particular time periods because its effect is off. Okay. And they have a difference of opinion about janazah salah. Is it salatul janazah because the person has died, or is it because they're about to be buried? So yeah, there's ikhtilaf. So in other words, you can do it or you can't do it. Both opinions are valid in our school. Okay. I'm giving you some more, lots of information here because it's at this level, even though it's the most basic thing, these things are necessary for you to know. And salah is a lot of discussion. So the niyyah, then I discussed that, and of course you're making the niyyah. But and in our school, you are supposed to make the niyyah, and you must bring to mind when you make the niyyah all of the acts of salah. So when you are making, you say Allah Akbar and making the niyyah, you are making intention to do all the acts of salah that is obligated. From standing, the ruku', the hamida, the i'tidal, the sajda, the fatiha, all of these. But sometimes that's difficult to do. And so what they say you should do is just to make intention in your heart of salah, okay? Because you are now letting go of the dunya and focusing in salah. Okay. So that is the takbiratul ihram. Then we have the Fatiha, qira'atul Fatiha, within the beginning of the salah. And bil basmala. So one must recite the basmala, and the basmala is a fard to recite. Okay. Of course, you don't have to do it out loud, but it is sunnah to do it out loud. So when you start, say Allahu Akbar, and in the salah, like Fajr and Maghrib and Isha, to say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim out loud, it's a sunnah, right? But to say the basmala even quietly, it's a fard. So of course, in the salah for Asr and for Dhuhr, one says it quietly, which is a sunnah to say it quietly in those prayers. Okay. What is the parameter or the darbit for reciting loud and soft? Okay. To recite softly means that no one else can hear you, but you can hear yourself. So to say, I can hear myself clearly, and you must hear yourself. You cannot do it within your mouth and you can't hear yourself, because that's not that would not be valid. If it's an act like the Fatiha or the Basmala that is obligatory for you to do. Okay. All right. So one must then do it in loud enough for oneself to hear only. Okay. If someone else hears it by chance, no problem. That's not a problem. But what is the parameter for when you're leading a prayer and someone else is praying with you, a jama'ah, a group, that at least one person should hear you. At least one person should be able to hear you normally. So if someone's standing next to you and you're reciting Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, that's soft, right? Or soft enough for just one person to hear you. The prayers that are loud are what? Fajr, Maghrib and Isha. If you don't recite them out loud, okay, when you're doing the normal salah, it is makruh. It's not haram, but you're going against the sunnah. So something that is obviously not good. Right. But for those who have missed prayers, right, and let's say you haven't prayed for, like you prayed on and off for a number of years, and now you want to make up your prayers, do you pray your prayers softly or loudly when you make them up? So some people say in the Shafi'i madhab that you pray it according to the prayer that so Dhuhr you pray softly, Fajr you pray loudly, even if the Fajr is, you're praying the Fajr, the make-up prayer in the day. Okay? So you pray it loudly, even if it's Fajr. Okay? And others will say it depends on the time of the day. So if you're praying the make-up prayer during the day, even if it's like Maghrib or Isha or Fajr, you pray it softly. And if you're making it up during the night, even if it's Dhuhr or Asr, you pray it loudly. Okay, so you have a choice then. Okay. And when it comes to making up lots of prayers, one does not have to follow the sequence of prayers. You can pray dhuhrs or just a lot of dhuhrs, or you don't have to pray fajr, dhuhr, asr, maghrib, isha. You don't have to do that sequence when you're making up prayers. Okay. So the strictest is that you should do all of your prayers in tartib, of course, in sequence, but you don't have to. So normally the advice that the scholars give is like whenever you pray, just pray an extra prayer with it. You know. Yeah. All right. And then he says the Fatiha. Okay. And the Fatiha, you must recite it properly. It is the only thing within our salah that you must be able to have tajweed when reciting. So much so that if you are praying behind someone and they pray the Fajr, they pray the Fatiha incorrectly, that it is permissible for you to intend to separate from him during the prayer. In other words, that this guy is reciting Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. We say غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين, right? This is okay. And you hear that, you're allowed now to say, you recite your own Fatiha, you make intention now, you're separating from him, you're still within the group, but you're praying on your own. So you go, even if the timing of your prayer, you're going to ruku, it matches the timing of the group. So it seems as if you're still praying with them, but you're actually praying on your own because you don't want to follow this imam anymore. You're allowed to do so because for the safety of your madhab and following the way that you believe that the prayer should be. Okay. And so, but it's better for you to just continue your prayer on your own. And even if you don't follow the jama'ah, as if they're not, clearly you separate. But to then also, if you don't want to like cause problems or people might talk or the imam might become upset, then yes, you're allowed to follow him, his madhab, and like take the Hanafi madhab, stuff like that. Yeah, but also we shouldn't be overzealous as well with these things because sometimes people they take this and say like, no, it's not valid. No, he's valid. His prayer is valid according to him and another madhab. Maybe he's a Hanafi, yani. But according to our madhab, it's not. All right. Then, so each one of us here, please, I hope everyone can recite the Fatiha properly. And if you struggle with, I'll recite it for you now, just as the minimum. But we'll listen to it on YouTube perhaps, and just try to practice that if you have any problems, especially with the shaddas. So there are 14 of them. So, and the basmala is part of it. Bismillah, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So there's 3 in the basmala. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Lillah, Rabb. That's the 2, 5. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, 2 again, so that's 7. Malik Yawmiddin, the Dal, okay, so that's 8. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين, so there's 2 again, so that's 9. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم, اهدنا, so that's 10. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم. So there's another one there. Okay, so that's 11. غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. So that's 12 and 13. So there's one I'm missing, right? What is the other one? بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. There's a 14th one that I'm seemingly missing, isn't it? Who knows what it is? 3, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, so for إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين, there's 2. I think I only counted 1 there. So yeah, there's 14. All right. And إخراج الضاد من الضاء. So there's no ضاء in the Fatiha. So there's no غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. It's ضاد. Okay. ضاد. وليس في الفاتحة ضاء. Okay. Then the ركوع. ويجب أن ينحني بحيث تنال راحتاه ركبتيه ويطمئن فيه وجوبا حتى تسكن أعضاؤه. Now, what is the minimum of the ruku' is that you bend down. No, you bend over so that your palms become in line with your knees. That's the minimum. If you don't actually touch your knees, it's not necessary, okay? So as long as it's in line with your knees and you bend a little bit, that is enough for the ruku'. But the akmal, the best is, of course, to touch the knees and for your back to be straight. So that if you put something on top of it, it doesn't fall off. But it's not necessary that that be the case. I think I saw on social media, like recently, someone saying that that's how you have to do it. No, it's not. That is simply the best. It's a sunnah to have your back at a 90-degree angle so that if you put something on top of it, it won't fall off. But the minimum is that the palms are parallel to the knees, okay? Or that it touches the knees, okay? And then he says, within the ruku', okay, within the ruku', you must have what's called itmi'nan. And itmi'nan is to be at a state of rest. And what this means is that you must sit or be in a position for the time it takes, the minimum time it takes to say Subhanallah. But your body should be at rest. Okay, and you can't just be doing that, subhanAllah, and going up again. No. So all of these videos that you see on social media of Taraweeh in Malaysia and Indonesia, of them praying so fast, I don't know if you've seen those. That's not the Shafi'i madhab. They're supposed to be Shafi'i, the Indonesian. But that's not valid according to the Shafi'i madhab at all. So in the Hanafi madhab, even that's kind of like, I don't even think it would be accepted because it's kind of like, in a way, I'm not saying that they're making fun, but it's kind of like mockery in a sense. But in the Hanafi madhab, you don't have to like wait for that little time, which is like a split second or second. Okay. And then you come up to al-i'tidal, Sami Allahu liman hamida. Okay. Saying, of course, the adhkar within each of the unit parts of prayer, that's a sunnah. You don't have to say them. You don't have to say Subhan Rabbil Azim wa bihamdihi and Rabbana wa lakal hamd and Subhan Rabbil A'la wa bihamdi in the sujood. It's a sunnah. So one should do so, but if one does not do so, the prayer is not invalid. Okay? And if one does do so, one must be able to hear themselves in order to get the reward of the sunnah. Because you know to know what you're saying is one should know what you're saying is okay. Right. ثم السجود مرتين, 2 sujuds. والجلوس بين السجدتين, and to sit between the two sajdas. Now, what is important here is okay. Well, we'll come to this now. Yeah. ويفعل باقي الركعات كذلك. Okay. So at this stage, I think we're going to end here, although we have a little bit more to do for the bab of salah. And inshallah, next time we'll finish it. And yeah, continue next time with this, because the bab of salah is the main section of the book. You know, and then if there's anything else, inshallah, we'll continue next week with it. Wallahu a'lam. And I'm sorry I couldn't do the seerah today because we were busy with this, the salah. Inshallah, next week we will continue with that.
No worries. I mean, I think that, especially of the chapters, the Bab of Salah was actually the one that inspired this course with the situation we had at the Brothers event. So, you know, Jazakallah khair. I think it's really important that we go through it really thoroughly. Because I know when I first started praying, there were a lot of these that I was getting wrong. So inshallah.
Right. Yeah, mashallah. I remember when I was a kid, then there's the jalsa between the two sajdas. When you come up from the first sajda, I was in a room and I forgot what to say. Normally you say like, اغفر لي وارحمني واجبرني وارفعني وعافني واعف عني. That's normally what they say. But I forgot what to say. And I stood there for like 15 minutes, like kind of going, for my father to come and remind me, because I thought you have to say it. Otherwise, I can't continue with my prayer. When I was a kid. Yeah, so there's importance of that. And from you need to distinguish what is obligating and what is sunnah. And yeah, ilm makes your actions easier as well. Yeah, inshallah. All right. All right, inshallah. I'll see you guys next week. If you have any questions, please mention in the group. I opened it, but I forgot to reply to you. But I replied to you now.
Yeah, no worries. Jazakallah khair. That was a
If
bit of a
there's any
silly
other
question, but it's just out of interest.
No, it's not a silly question at all. They discuss this in the books of. All right. Okay. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, and our prayers for your exams today.
Ameen. Shukran. Jazakallah khair.